The executives at Meridian Tech had never lost a bid, not in the last 5 years. Their confidence bordered on arrogance, a trait that served them well in the cutthroat world of corporate technology. The team believed they were untouchable, invincible even, until Marcus Washington arrived. The Monday morning began like any other at Meridian's glass and steel headquarters in downtown Chicago. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sleek conference room where the executive team had gathered for their weekly meeting. Coffee cups steamed, laptops hummed, and the air buzzed with the familiar energy of success. James Harrington, VP of Sales, leaned back in his leather chair, his custom-tailored suit jacket unbuttoned just enough to display his monogrammed shirt cuffs. "Davidson accounts in the bag," he announced, flicking through his presentation with practiced nonchalance. "They practically begged us to take their money." A wave of knowing laughter rippled around the table. This was how it always went. Another week, another win. Elizabeth Chen, Chief Marketing Officer, swiped through metrics on her tablet. "Q3 numbers are tracking 20% above projections," she said, not bothering to hide her smugness. "PR's already drafting the press release." At the head of the table, CFO Richard Keller nodded approvingly. At 58, with silver hair and a perpetual tan from monthly golf trips to Palm Springs, he'd been the de facto leader since the founder stepped down last year. The official CEO position had remained vacant, but everyone knew Richard was running the show. "Good work, people," Richard said, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "Let's wrap this up by 10. I've got a lunch with the Westbrook investors." Victoria Blackwell, General Counsel, and the only black woman in the room, glanced up from her notes. Unlike the others, her expression remained neutral, measured. "Before we adjourn, HR sent over an update about the CEO search." A collective groan filled the room. "Come on, Vic," Alex Peterson from Product Development called from across the table. "We all know that's just the board covering their asses. We're hitting record numbers without a CEO." "Yeah," James chimed in. "If it ain't broke, why mess with it?" Victoria's gaze was steady. "The board has finalized their selection. The new CEO starts next Monday." The room went silent. 6 pairs of eyes stared back at her in disbelief. That's not possible," Richard sputtered, his composed facade cracking for the first time that morning. "I wasn't informed." "The decision was made late Friday," Victoria cut in, her voice level. "The board wanted to announce it company-wide this morning, but I thought this team deserved advance notice." "Who is it?" Elizabeth demanded, her perfectly manicured nails gripping her tablet a little too tightly. Victoria took a breath. "Marcus Washington, former COO at TechLight Systems." Another beat of silence, then James let out a snort. "TechLight, aren't they the ones who nearly went bankrupt last year?" "They were in trouble, but Washington executed a remarkable turnaround," Victoria replied. "They're now valued higher than before the crisis." "I've never heard of him," Richard said dismissively, adjusting his cuffs. "Probably another diversity hire to make the board look good." Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flashed in her eyes. "He has an MBA from Wharton, 15 years of industry experience, and he turned around a failing company in 18 months. "Still," Alex said, exchanging glances with James, "it's weird they'd bring in an outsider without consulting the executive team." Richard leaned forward, confidence returning to his voice. "Don't worry about it. New CEOs always come in with big ideas, but they learn quickly who really runs things around here." He smiled thinly. "We'll show him how things work at Meridian, and if he's smart, he'll stay out of our way." The meeting dispersed, but the news hung in the air like a storm cloud. The executive floor buzzed with speculation for the rest of the week. No one had met Marcus Washington. No one knew what to expect, but everyone had an opinion. "I looked him up," James told a group gathered around the espresso machine on Wednesday. Guess what? He's black. Really? Alex raised an eyebrow, lowering his voice. So that's why the board was so secretive. Makes sense now, Elizabeth muttered. The board's been under pressure about their diversity numbers. By Friday afternoon, assumptions had calcified into certainties. Marcus Washington was a diversity hire, a figurehead chosen to appease shareholders and score PR points. He wouldn't understand Meridian's culture. He wouldn't have the technical knowledge. He certainly wouldn't challenge the status quo that had made them all wealthy. Richard had taken to referring to the situation as our little adjustment period, assuring everyone that nothing would really change. We'll let him have the corner office and the title, he told them over drinks that Friday. But we know who's really steering this ship. Monday arrived with an undercurrent of tension. The executive floor had been polished to a mirror shine. The conference room was prepped for the 9 a.m. introduction meeting. At 8:55, the team assembled, taking their usual seats around the table. Richard positioned himself at the head, a subtle power move that didn't go unnoticed. At precisely 9 a.m., the door opened. Marcus Washington wasn't what they expected. Standing 6'2" with broad shoulders, he filled the doorway with a commanding presence that immediately drew all eyes. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, his crisp white shirt contrasting with his dark skin. But it was his eyes that caught everyone's attention, sharp, observant, missing nothing as they swept across the room. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and clear. "I appreciate you all coming in early." In the brief silence that followed, Victoria stood. "Welcome to Meridian, Mr. Washington. We're looking forward to working with you." Marcus nodded to her with a hint of a smile. "Thank you, Ms. Blackwell. Your reputation precedes you." Richard cleared his throat pointedly, standing with an outstretched hand. "Richard Keller, CFO. We're quite proud of what we've built here at Meridian." "As you should be," Marcus replied, shaking his hand firmly. "The company's growth is impressive." His gaze lingered on Richard's position at the head of the table, but he said nothing about it. Instead, he moved to an empty chair midway down. One by one, the executives introduced themselves, offering carefully worded welcomes that masked their skepticism. Marcus acknowledged each with the same attentive respect, asking a question or two that revealed he'd done his homework on each of them. When the introductions finished, Richard leaned forward. "Well, since we're all acquainted now, perhaps we should brief you on our current projects and methodologies. Meridian has a unique approach that's served us quite well." Marcus raised a hand slightly. "Before we dive into operations, I'd like to share something with all of you." He opened his laptop and connected it to the room's display system. "I've spent the last month studying Meridian, its history, its products, its culture, and its financials." The screen filled with a complex graph that none of them recognized. "This is a competitive analysis I commissioned," Marcus continued, showing Meridian's market position against the top 5 competitors in each product category. The room fell silent as they absorbed the data. The graphs told a story none of them had seen before. While Meridian dominated in certain areas, they were losing ground in others, particularly in emerging technologies. "But our quarterly numbers," Richard began, "are strong," Marcus finished for him. "But they're masking fundamental weaknesses in our innovation pipeline and client retention rates." He clicked to the next slide. This analysis shows that 78% of Meridian's revenue comes from legacy clients and products. Only 22% represents new growth areas. Elizabeth frowned. "That's not what our internal reports show." "That's because your reports measure growth against historical performance," Marcus explained, his tone neutral but firm. "This analysis measures against market potential and competitor growth. They're different metrics that tell different stories." For the next 30 minutes, Marcus walked them through an analysis more thorough than anything they'd seen internally. He identified weaknesses they'd overlooked, opportunities they'd missed, and risks they'd ignored. The data was irrefutable, the analysis razor-sharp. In summary, he concluded, Meridian is successful, but vulnerable. The technological landscape is shifting faster than this company is adapting. My mandate from the board is to change that. Richard's face had grown increasingly flushed during the presentation. With all due respect, he said, struggling to keep his voice even, we've built this company into what it is today. Our methods have worked until now, Marcus interjected calmly. And I value that institutional knowledge, but past success doesn't guarantee future results. He closed his laptop. Tomorrow morning, I'll share my strategic vision for Meridian's next phase. Today, I'd like to meet with each of you individually to hear your perspectives. He stood, buttoning his jacket with a practiced ease. Ms. Blackwell, could I start with you? I'd like to review some legal considerations for the initiatives I'm planning. Victoria nodded, gathering her materials. As they headed for the door, Marcus paused and turned back to the group. One more thing, he said, his expression unreadable. I believe in transparency and direct communication. If you have concerns about my leadership, about any aspect of it, bring them to me directly. My door is always open. His gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Richard. I look forward to working with all of you. As the door closed behind them, the remaining executives exchanged glances. The air in the room felt different somehow, charged with an unfamiliar energy. Well, James finally said, breaking the silence. That wasn't what I expected. Richard's jaw clenched as he gathered his papers. It's just a show, he muttered. Anyone can put together fancy graphs. Let's see how he handles real business. But as they filed out of the conference room, a seed of doubt had been planted. The confident certainty that had defined their world just hours ago had begun to crack, ever so slightly. Marcus Washington wasn't going to be the figurehead they'd anticipated, and for the first time in years, the future at Meridian Tech suddenly seemed unpredictable. Victoria Blackwell had worked at Meridian for 7 years. In that time, she'd witnessed the evolution of the company from a scrappy tech startup to a corporate behemoth. She'd also learned to keep her opinions to herself, especially when those opinions ran counter to Richard Keller's vision. But as she settled into a chair across from Marcus Washington in his still sparse office, something told her those days might be over. I appreciate you making time for me, Ms. Blackwell, Marcus said, his voice carrying that same quiet authority that had silenced the conference room earlier. Please call me Victoria, she replied, and I should be thanking you. It's not often legal gets consulted before decisions are made around here. A brief smile crossed Marcus's face. That explains the 17 last-minute contract reviews your team handled last quarter. Victoria blinked in surprise. You've been studying our workflow? I've been studying everything, Marcus said simply, including the fact that your legal department consistently works more overtime than any other division, despite being understaffed compared to industry standards. Victoria felt a strange sensation, the rare feeling of being truly seen. We manage. You shouldn't have to just manage, Marcus replied, his gaze direct but not unkind. Excellence shouldn't come at the cost of burnout. For the next hour, they discussed Meridian's legal positioning, potential regulatory challenges, and opportunities for improvement. Victoria found herself speaking more candidly than she had in years, voicing concerns she'd long kept buried. Marcus listened intently, asking pointed questions that revealed a surprisingly nuanced understanding of corporate law. As their meeting concluded, Marcus leaned back slightly. One more question, if you don't mind. What's the real culture here? Not the one in the employee handbook, the one that exists when no one's watching. Victoria hesitated, weighing her words carefully. Meridian rewards confidence, she finally said. Sometimes at the expense of competence. Marcus nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty. I suspect that's about to change. Throughout the day, similar conversations unfolded as Marcus met with each executive. Some, like Elizabeth Chen from marketing, approached the meetings defensively, armed with charts and rehearsed talking points. Others, like Alex Peterson, attempted to charm their way through with industry jargon and casual references to elite connections. By late afternoon, word had spread through the executive floor. The new CEO wasn't just asking easy questions. He was probing, challenging, revealing an understanding of their divisions that some found unsettling. James Harrington was the last to meet with Marcus that day. As VP of Sales, James had cultivated a particular breed of charisma, the kind that closed deals over whiskey and sealed partnerships on golf courses. He entered Marcus's office with the easy confidence of someone used to controlling conversations. "Heard you've been grilling everyone," James said with a practiced chuckle as he dropped into a chair. "Hope you saved some energy for the good news department." Marcus's expression remained neutral. "I've been having productive conversations. I'm looking forward to yours." For 20 minutes, James extolled the virtues of his sales team, highlighting record numbers and growing accounts. Marcus listened silently, occasionally making notes. "So that's the Harrington method," James concluded with a wide smile. "Keep it simple, keep it social, and the contracts sign themselves." Marcus set down his pen. "Impressive numbers," he acknowledged. "Though I'm curious about something. Your team's win rate with new clients is significantly lower than with existing accounts. Any thoughts on why?" James's smile faltered slightly. "We focus on sure bets. Cultivating relationships with established clients yields better returns than chasing new ones." "Perhaps," Marcus replied, "but it also means we're increasingly dependent on a shrinking client pool. The average age of a Meridian client is 58. What's your strategy for connecting with younger decision makers?" James blinked. "Younger executives respect success. Our reputation speaks for itself." "Does it?" Marcus asked, pulling up a slide on his tablet. "This survey of tech executives under 40 suggests otherwise. Only 17% view Meridian as innovative. 42% describe us as outdated but reliable." James shifted uncomfortably. "Where did you get that data?" "I commissioned it," Marcus replied. "My first week after accepting this position." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with James increasingly on the defensive, as Marcus methodically deconstructed the sales department's approach. When James finally left, his confident swagger had diminished considerably. Richard Keller watched the parade of executives in and out of Marcus's office with growing irritation. He'd expected to be consulted first, not last, or worse, not at all. By 5 p.m., he could wait no longer. He knocked sharply on Marcus's door and entered without waiting for a response. "Holding court, I see," Richard said, gesturing to the coffee cups and water bottles scattered across the conference table. "Quite the first day." Marcus looked up from his notes. "Richard, I was planning to connect with you tomorrow morning. My schedule today was packed." "Yet you found time for everyone else on the executive team," Richard noted, making no effort to hide his annoyance. "As CFO, I thought I might be a priority." "Everyone is a priority," Marcus replied evenly. "I scheduled meetings based on the immediate needs of my strategic plan." Richard's eyebrows rose. "Your strategic plan? Shouldn't that be something we develop together as a leadership team?" "The board hired me to implement a specific vision," Marcus said, standing to face Richard directly. "I value input from the team, but the direction is already set." Richard felt a flash of heat rise in his neck. "And what direction might that be?" "We've built a profitable company here. Our shareholders are happy. Our numbers are strong. Our numbers are good, Marcus agreed, but our trajectory is concerning. Meridian has been coasting on legacy systems and established clients. Meanwhile, our competitors are innovating faster and capturing the emerging markets we've ignored. We've ignored nothing, Richard said sharply. We've been strategic about where we invest our resources. Marcus nodded slowly. Like the Davidson account James mentioned this morning, the one that's in the bag. Exactly, Richard replied. 20 million in guaranteed revenue, a perfect example of our success. Except Davidson is planning to scale back their contract by 40% next year, Marcus said. They've already begun transitioning some of their systems to greenfield tech. Richard stared, momentarily speechless. That's not possible. James would have... James doesn't know, Marcus interrupted. I learned this from my industry contacts. Davidson hasn't told us yet because they're afraid of disruption during the transition. They don't trust our ability to adapt. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard struggled to process this information, to find a way to regain control of the conversation. If that's true, and I'd want to verify it personally, we can address it. We've faced challenges before. This isn't just about Davidson, Marcus said. It's about a pattern of complacency that's threatening Meridian's future. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit, we have a lot to discuss. For the next hour, Richard listened as Marcus outlined issues that had been hidden beneath Meridian's glossy surface: client dissatisfaction, employee turnover in key technical roles, competitors outpacing their innovation, outdated infrastructure, increasing costs while decreasing efficiency. Tomorrow morning, Marcus concluded, I'll be announcing some significant changes. I wanted you to hear them from me first, out of respect for your position. Richard straightened. What kind of changes? We're restructuring the product development division to accelerate our cloud transition. We're implementing a new commission structure that incentivizes new client acquisition, not just account maintenance. And we're launching an internal innovation lab to fast-track emerging technologies. Richard's mind raced, calculating costs, disruptions, risks. These are major shifts. The board will expect consultation on changes of this magnitude. The board has already approved my plan, Marcus said. That was part of my hiring agreement. Richard felt the ground shifting beneath him. For years, he'd effectively controlled the board through careful information management and the steady flow of dividends. The idea that they'd approved far-reaching changes without his input was almost inconceivable. You've been CEO for less than 8 hours, Richard said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Don't you think it would be wise to understand the company better before making such dramatic moves? Marcus's expression remained impassive. I've been studying Meridian for weeks, Richard. I've spoken with clients, employees, competitors, and industry analysts. I've reviewed 5 years of financial reports, sales data, and performance metrics. He leaned forward slightly. I understand this company better than you might think. Richard stood, struggling to maintain his composure. Well, I hope you know what you're doing. Disrupting a successful operation carries significant risks. So does standing still while the world changes around you, Marcus replied. Change is coming, Richard. We can either lead it or be consumed by it. As Richard left the office, a storm of emotions roiled within him. Anger, disbelief, and something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Marcus Washington wasn't just a new face in the corner office. He represented a fundamental threat to the status quo Richard had carefully cultivated. That evening, as most employees had gone home, Richard made a series of phone calls to his allies on the executive team. The message was consistent. Marcus Washington needed to be contained. His radical ideas would disrupt their success. They needed to stand united against these unwelcome changes. He's overreaching, Richard told James during their call. trying to make a big splash to justify his hiring. We need to protect what we've built. Agreed, James replied, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. Though I have to admit, he knew things about my department that even I didn't know. That's just smoke and mirrors, Richard insisted. Anyone can memorize a few statistics. What matters is real-world experience, and in that department, we have him outmatched. But as Richard hung up, the doubt had already taken root. For the first time in years, he updated his resume, just in case. Because something told him that tomorrow wasn't going to go according to his plan. Not anymore. Tuesday morning arrived with a palpable tension rippling through Meridian's headquarters. Word had spread through the company grapevine. Something big was happening. The all-hands meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. had been marked mandatory attendance across all departments, unusual for a company where engineers and developers typically participated remotely. By 9:45, Meridian's largest conference space was filled to capacity. Employees stood along walls, squeezed into corners, and clustered in doorways. On the elevated platform at the front of the room, the executive team sat in a row of chairs, their expressions ranging from Victoria's composed neutrality to Richard's barely concealed hostility. At precisely 10 a.m., Marcus Washington walked onto the platform. The room fell silent. "Good morning," he began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "Thank you all for being here. For those who haven't heard, I'm Marcus Washington, your new CEO." He paused, scanning the audience with those penetrating eyes. "I've spent the last 3 weeks studying this company, its strengths, its challenges, and most importantly, its people. Meridian has a proud history and impressive achievements. But history doesn't guarantee future success, and achievement can sometimes breed complacency." Richard shifted visibly in his seat. Marcus continued without acknowledging him. "Today marks a new chapter for Meridian Tech. The technology landscape is evolving faster than ever, and we face a critical choice: evolve with it or become obsolete." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus outlined his vision with precise clarity. He detailed the reorganization of product development, the new sales incentive structure, and the launch of the Innovation Lab. With each announcement, he provided data, supporting the need for change and specific metrics that would measure success. "These changes will not be easy," Marcus acknowledged, "but they are necessary. Some of you may be wondering why I'm moving so quickly. The answer is simple. Our competitors aren't waiting, so neither can we." He clicked to a new slide showing Meridian's market position compared to rising competitors. The graph was stark, revealing a troubling trajectory that few in the room had seen presented so plainly before. "This is where we are," Marcus said, indicating the current data point. Then he traced his finger along a downward projection. "And this is where we're headed if we don't change course." A murmur ran through the crowd. Near the back, a senior developer named Tyler Reynolds leaned toward his colleague. "I've been saying this for months," he whispered. Nobody wanted to hear it. Marcus moved to his final slides. "Starting today, we're implementing a more transparent communication structure. You'll receive weekly updates on our progress. My office door is open to anyone with ideas that can move us forward." He paused, his expression intensifying. "But let me be clear. Resistance to necessary change will not be tolerated. If you cannot commit to this new direction, Meridian may no longer be the right place for you." Richard's jaw tightened. James looked down at his hands. Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably. "That said," Marcus continued, his tone softening slightly, "I believe in the talent and potential of this team. We have everything we need to regain our position as industry leaders. All that's required is the courage to change." He concluded his presentation to scattered applause that gradually swelled as more employees joined in. As people filed out, the buzz of conversation filled the halls, a mixture of excitement, anxiety, and speculation. Richard wasted no time. Before Marcus could leave the platform, he approached him, keeping his voice low. That was quite a performance. Threatening Jobs is a bold move for your first official day. Marcus turned to face him fully. I didn't threaten anyone's job, Richard. I clarified expectations. There's a difference. You've created unnecessary panic, Richard pressed. Stock price will take a hit when word of this restructuring gets out. Perhaps temporarily, Marcus agreed. But I'm not managing for quarterly results. I'm building for sustainable growth. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. The board might not share your long-term perspective if shareholders start asking questions. The board is fully aligned with my strategy, Marcus replied evenly. In fact, I have another meeting with them this afternoon to discuss implementation details. Before Richard could respond, a group of young engineers approached, eager to speak with Marcus about the innovation lab. Richard was forced to step aside, his retort dying on his lips as he watched Marcus engage effortlessly with the technical team. By lunchtime, the executive floor had split into factions. Victoria and two division heads who saw opportunity in the changes gathered in one conference room. Richard, James, and Elizabeth barricaded themselves in another, strategizing their response. He's overreaching, Elizabeth insisted, pacing the room. These changes will disrupt client relationships that took years to build. James nodded grimly. And this new commission structure is designed to undermine my entire sales strategy. It's like he's deliberately targeting what's worked for us. Because he doesn't understand our business, Richard said. He's an outsider applying generic solutions to specific challenges. Elizabeth stopped pacing. So what do we do? Richard leaned forward. We protect our departments, slow walk the changes, document every hiccup, and when things inevitably go sideways, we'll be ready to step in with the solutions that have always worked. And if he pushes back? James asked. Richard's expression hardened. Then we go to the board. They hired him, but they answer to shareholders. If we can show his changes are hurting the bottom line, they'll have no choice but to reconsider. Elizabeth nodded slowly. It's risky. So is letting him dismantle everything we've built, Richard countered. Meanwhile, in the engineering department, a different conversation was unfolding. Tyler Reynolds, the senior developer who had been quietly raising concerns for months, found himself suddenly at the center of attention. You called it, man, said Amir, another developer. Remember that security protocol update you kept pushing for? The one Keller said was unnecessary overhead? Tyler nodded, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. Washington mentioned it specifically in the breakout session just now, said it's being prioritized for immediate implementation. How did he even know about it? Amir wondered. That proposal never made it past middle management. He's been doing his homework, Tyler replied, talking to people at all levels, not just the executives. Similar conversations echoed across departments as employees who had felt ignored or undervalued suddenly found their ideas acknowledged. For many, Marcus's approach represented something they hadn't experienced at Meridian in years, recognition based on merit rather than politics. By mid-afternoon, Marcus had set up a temporary war room where he met with department heads and key personnel to begin implementing his plan. Victoria Blackwell joined these sessions, providing legal guidance and organizational insight that proved invaluable. The technical teams are on board, she told Marcus during a brief break. They've been waiting for leadership that understands modern development practices. Marcus nodded. And the executive resistance? Victoria hesitated. Richard's rallying opposition. James and Elizabeth are with him. They're plotting, though I don't know the specifics. I expected as much, Marcus replied. Change threatens those who've benefited most from the status quo. They'll try to undermine you, Victoria warned. Richard has deep connections with some board members. I'm aware, Marcus said. But the board hired me for results, not popularity. As long as we execute effectively, they'll support the direction. The afternoon flew by in a flurry of meetings, decisions, and preparations. By 6 o'clock, while most employees had gone home, Marcus remained in his office reviewing project timelines with the newly appointed Innovation Lab Director, a brilliant engineer named Sophia Kim, who had been overlooked for promotion 3 times under the previous leadership. "We can have the first prototype ready in 6 weeks, Sophia was saying, her enthusiasm palpable. "The team is already volunteering for extra shifts." Marcus smiled but shook his head. "I appreciate the dedication, but I don't want burnout. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Set up proper work schedules and stick to them." Sophia blinked in surprise. "But the timeline can accommodate healthy work practices," Marcus finished firmly. "Quality comes from sustainable effort, not exhaustion." As Sophia left, Marcus noticed Richard Keller hovering near the doorway. "Still here?" Marcus asked. "I thought you had a dinner with the Westbrook investors." Richard's surprise at being remembered flashed briefly across his face. "Rescheduled. Mind if I come in?" Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. Richard entered, but remained standing. "I've been reflecting on this morning's announcements," Richard began, his tone carefully measured. "While I have reservations about the pace, I recognize that fresh perspectives can be valuable." Marcus studied him, noting the calculated shift from that morning's hostility. "I appreciate that, Richard. That said," Richard continued, "I think it would be beneficial for us to present a united front to the board tomorrow. Perhaps we could review your presentation together. I might offer insights that would strengthen your position." The request was reasonable on its surface, a CFO helping prepare financial projections for the board. But Marcus recognized the maneuver. Richard wanted to see the presentation in advance to prepare counter-arguments to identify vulnerabilities he could exploit. "Thank you for the offer," Marcus replied smoothly. "But the presentation is finalized. The board specifically requested that I deliver my assessment without filtering it through existing leadership perspectives." Richard's facade of cooperation cracked slightly. "That's unusual protocol." "These are unusual circumstances," Marcus countered. Richard nodded slowly, his expression calculating. "Well, I wouldn't want to overstep. Just trying to be helpful." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. There's a situation with the Archimedes project I think you should be aware of. The technical specifications have changed and we may need to adjust our delivery timeline." Marcus pulled up a file on his tablet. "You're referring to the security enhancement they requested last week?" "Already addressed. I spoke with their CTO this morning and we've reached an agreement on the implementation schedule." For a moment, Richard stood completely still, visibly processing the fact that Marcus had already handled a situation Richard had assumed he knew nothing about. "I see," Richard finally said. "You've been thorough." "I try to be," Marcus replied simply. After Richard left, Marcus remained at his desk, reviewing notes from the day's meetings. He knew the real challenge was just beginning. Richard and his allies wouldn't give up control easily, and their intimate knowledge of Meridian's inner workings gave them powerful tools for resistance. But Marcus had faced similar situations before. At TechLight, he'd inherited a culture of entrenched mediocrity, protected by executives who viewed change as a threat to their fiefdoms. He'd transformed that company by focusing on the people who embraced progress while methodically removing obstacles, human and otherwise. His phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. "Keller just called an unofficial executive breakfast for 7 a.m. at Morton's. Invitation specifically excluded you and me." Marcus smiled slightly. The battle lines were being drawn more clearly now. He texted back, Expected. Keep me informed if you hear anything useful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new resistance. But as Marcus finally packed up to leave the office, he felt a quiet confidence. The seeds of change had been planted. Now it was time to nurture them and to pull out the weeds that threatened their growth. The private dining room at Morton's Steakhouse buzzed with tense energy as Richard Keller surveyed his assembled allies. James Harrington was already on his second coffee, drumming his fingers nervously against the polished table. Elizabeth Chen reviewed notes on her tablet, her usual poise somewhat diminished by the early hour. Alex Peterson from Product Development slouched in his chair, still bleary-eyed, while two other senior directors completed the gathering. "Thanks for coming on short notice," Richard began, his voice low despite the closed door. "I think we all recognize what's happening here." "A hostile takeover?" James offered with a humorless laugh. Richard nodded grimly. "In effect, yes. Washington's moving with remarkable aggression. He's implementing sweeping changes without understanding the complex relationships and processes that make Meridian successful." Elizabeth looked up from her tablet. "He's meeting with the board at 11. My sources say he's presenting a 3-year transformation plan." 3 years, Alex scoffed. "He's been with us 3 days. "Which is why we need to act now," Richard said, leaning forward. "Washington is consolidating power rapidly. He's already connecting directly with junior staff, bypassing proper management channels." James frowned. "I caught him in a 40-minute conversation with Raj from my sales team yesterday. Raj has been with us barely a year." "Exactly," Richard said. "He's identifying potential allies at all levels, particularly people who might have grievances against current management." "So what's our play?" Alex asked, reaching for a pastry. "We can't just tell the board they made a mistake. They'd never admit it this quickly." Richard's expression grew calculated. "We don't have to. We just need to demonstrate that Washington's approach is too disruptive, too risky for our business model." He lowered his voice further. "The Davidson account is our leverage." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" "James," Richard said, "you mentioned the Davidson renewal is in process. What's the timeline?" "Final signatures next week," James replied. "Why?" "And you handle Todd Davidson personally, correct? You have a relationship?" James nodded slowly, beginning to understand. 20 years of golf and scotch. He trusts me." "Good," Richard said. "We need to make him aware that these organizational changes might impact service delivery. Nothing alarming, just enough concern that he might delay signing until things stabilize." Alex frowned. "You want to sabotage our own deal?" "Not sabotage," Richard corrected sharply. "Postpone. If Davidson delays renewal, it creates exactly the kind of uncertainty the board fears most. Washington's honeymoon period will end quickly if a major client expresses doubts." Elizabeth tapped her pen against her notepad. "That's playing with fire, Richard. If we lose Davidson—" "We won't," Richard assured her. "James will make sure of that. We just need them to hesitate long enough to demonstrate that Washington's disruption has consequences." The group exchanged uneasy glances. What Richard was proposing crossed a line, deliberately undermining the company's interest to protect their positions. "There's another issue," Alex said after a moment. "Washington approved that security protocol Tyler Reynolds has been pushing for. The one we've been delaying." Richard's jaw tightened. "Without consulting you?" "Completely bypassed me," Alex confirmed. "Called Tyler directly yesterday afternoon. The team's already implementing it." "See? That's exactly what I'm talking about," Richard said, slapping his hand on the table. "No respect for established chains of command. No understanding of why we made the decisions we made." The waiter entered with breakfast plates, temporarily halting the conversation. As he arranged the food and refilled coffee cups, the executives exchanged meaningful glances. When the door closed again, Richard continued in a more measured tone. "We need to protect what we've built. Each of you should document every instance where Washington's changes create problems. Delays, client concerns, staff confusion, anything we can present to the board as evidence that this transition is being mishandled." James cut into his steak and eggs. "And Victoria? She seems firmly in Washington's camp." Richard's expression darkened. "Victoria has chosen her side. She's been frustrated with our approach for years. Now she sees an opportunity to gain influence." He shook his head. "She'll regret that choice soon enough." By 10:30 that morning, Marcus Washington stood outside the boardroom reviewing his presentation one final time. He'd anticipated resistance from Richard and his allies, but the breakfast meeting confirmed they were organizing a coordinated opposition. Victoria had provided him with a general outline of their strategy, enough to be prepared without compromising her professional ethics. "Mr. Washington?" The board secretary appeared at his elbow. "They're ready for you." The Meridian boardroom exuded old money gravitas, dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and portraits of founders and former CEOs lining the walls. Marcus noted, without particular surprise, that every face in those portraits was white. 8 board members sat around the massive table, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to guarded skepticism. At the head sat Eleanor Fitzgerald, the board chair, a formidable woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. She had been Marcus's strongest advocate during the hiring process, recognizing before others that Meridian needed fundamental change. "Marcus," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Welcome. We're eager to hear your initial assessment." For the next hour, Marcus presented his analysis and strategy with the same precision and clarity he'd shown the previous day. The board members listened attentively, occasionally interjecting with questions that Marcus answered without hesitation. His command of the material, from financial projections to technical specifications, was absolute. As he concluded, Eleanor leaned forward. "You've been with Meridian for all of 2 days, and you've already identified issues that have concerned some of us for years." She glanced around the table. "I'm impressed with the thoroughness of your analysis." An older board member, Harold Wilson, Marcus recognized from his research, cleared his throat. "While I appreciate your diligence, Mr. Washington, I'm concerned about the pace of change you're proposing. Richard Keller has managed our finances admirably for years. His conservative approach has protected shareholder value through multiple market fluctuations." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Mr. Keller has indeed been a steady hand, but stability isn't the same as growth." He pulled up a new slide showing Meridian's market valuation compared to competitors over the past 5 years. "While we've maintained consistent dividends, our overall valuation has stagnated. Meanwhile, more innovative competitors have seen their market caps triple." Harold frowned at the chart. "These companies have different business models. They've taken on significant debt to fuel that growth." "Some have," Marcus acknowledged, "but others have simply adapted more quickly to changing market demands." He clicked to another slide. "This chart shows companies with comparable debt structures to ours. The difference isn't financial strategy, it's innovation agility." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Marcus addressing concerns and detailing implementation plans. By the meeting's end, even the skeptical Harold seemed grudgingly impressed. Eleanor wrapped up the session. "Thank you, Marcus. This is exactly why we brought you on board. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks to review initial progress." As the board members filed out, Harold paused beside Marcus. "Richard speaks highly of your credentials," he said, his tone suggesting the opposite, "though he has concerns about your understanding of Meridian's unique culture." Marcus met the older man's gaze directly. Change is always uncomfortable, Mr. Wilson. But discomfort and danger aren't the same thing. Harold studied him for a moment longer, then nodded and departed without further comment. Marcus returned to his office to find Victoria waiting with an update. "How did it go?" she asked. "About as expected," Marcus replied. Support from Eleanor and the progressives. Skepticism from Harold and Richard's old guard, but no outright opposition yet. Victoria handed him a folder. "You should know what you're up against. This is a transcript of Richard's meeting with James about the Davidson account." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "How did you get this?" "James's assistant, Tanya. She's been documenting his inappropriate behavior for months. When she heard him plotting to undermine a client relationship, she decided it was time to come forward." Marcus scanned the transcript, his expression hardening. "They're willing to risk a $20 million account to undermine me." "It gets worse," Victoria said. "Richard has been making calls to several key clients, suggesting that service might be disrupted during the transition." Marcus closed the folder. "Thank you for bringing this to me. I'll handle it." Later that afternoon, Marcus called an emergency meeting with the Davidson account team, deliberately excluding James. The team lead, a competent manager named Rachel Martinez, arrived looking nervous. "Is something wrong with the Davidson contract?" she asked as she took a seat. "Not yet," Marcus replied. "But we need to be proactive. I understand the renewal is next week." Rachel nodded. "Everything's on track. Mr. Harrington handles the final negotiations personally, but we've prepared all the technical specifications." "I'd like to meet with Todd Davidson directly," Marcus said. "Today, if possible." Rachel looked startled. "Mr. Harrington typically—" "I understand," Marcus interrupted gently. "But as CEO, I believe it's important for me to establish direct relationships with our key clients. Could you arrange it?" 2 hours later, Marcus sat across from Todd Davidson in the client's downtown office. Davidson was a blunt, practical man who had built his company from nothing into a regional powerhouse. "Appreciate you coming personally," Davidson said, studying Marcus with open curiosity. "Though I admit I was surprised when you requested the meeting. James usually handles these discussions." "James is an excellent sales leader," Marcus acknowledged. "But I wanted to speak with you directly about some changes at Meridian that might have reached your attention." Davidson's expression confirmed Marcus's suspicion. "James mentioned there might be some transition issues, said it might be prudent to delay our renewal until things settle." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I suspected as much. That's precisely why I'm here." He leaned forward. "Mr. Davidson, I believe in transparent communication, especially with valued partners like yourself. Yes, Meridian is undergoing significant changes, but those changes are designed to better serve clients like you." For the next 30 minutes, Marcus outlined his vision for Meridian, specifically highlighting improvements that would directly benefit Davidson's operations. He detailed the security protocol implementation that had been delayed for months, explaining how it would protect Davidson's sensitive data more effectively. "The truth is," Marcus concluded, "renewal delays would actually hinder these improvements rather than protect you from disruption." Davidson studied him for a long moment. "James made it sound like your changes were creating instability." "Change and instability aren't synonymous," Marcus replied, "though some might prefer you believe they are." Understanding dawned in Davidson's eyes. "Office politics," he said with a knowing nod. "Been there myself when I brought in new leadership." "Every organization faces these challenges during transitions," Marcus acknowledged. "But I want to assure you that your account remains our priority. In fact," he pulled out his tablet and opened a document. "I've authorized accelerated implementation of the enhanced security protocols you requested last quarter, at no additional cost. Davidson's eyebrows rose. James said that would require contract renegotiation. It should have been included from the beginning, Marcus said simply. Consider it a good faith commitment to our partnership. By the time Marcus left Davidson's office, not only had they agreed to proceed with the renewal on schedule, but Davidson had expressed interest in expanding services in the coming year. As Marcus returned to Meridian, he knew his direct intervention with Davidson would enrage Richard and James. They would see it as a violation of established protocols, an overstep of his authority. But he hadn't come to Meridian to maintain the status quo or to play by rules designed to protect mediocrity. He had come to transform the company, and sometimes transformation required breaking things that didn't work anymore. James Harrington stared at his phone in disbelief. The text from Todd Davidson was cordial but firm. Great meeting with your new CEO, moving forward with renewal as planned, looking forward to expanded services. His hand shook slightly as he placed the phone on his desk. For 20 years, he had personally managed the Davidson relationship. It was his account, built on countless dinners, golf games, and carefully cultivated trust, and Washington had simply walked in and taken it over. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Harrington, Mr. Keller wants to see you in his office right away." James found Richard pacing his corner office, face flushed with anger. "Davidson just called me," Richard said without preamble. "Apparently Washington met with him this afternoon." "I know," James replied, dropping into a chair. "He bypassed me completely. Got Rachel to set up the meeting." Richard stopped pacing. "This is unacceptable. He's deliberately undermining established relationships." "What's worse," James added, "Davidson mentioned expanded services. Washington offered them that security upgrade for free, the one we've been using as leverage for a larger contract." Richard slammed his palm against his desk. "He's giving away services we could charge for? That's financial irresponsibility." "He positioned it as a good faith gesture," James explained. "Davidson ate it up." For a moment, Richard was silent, his tactical mind reassessing the situation. "He's smarter than we anticipated," he finally said, "and apparently not playing by conventional rules." "What do we do?" James asked. Richard straightened his tie, regaining his composure. "We adapt. This is a setback, but not a defeat. Washington's direct approach with Davidson gives us something concrete to bring to the board. He's bypassing established protocols, potentially damaging long-term value by giving away premium services." "You think the board will care about protocols?" James asked skeptically. "Harold Wilson will," Richard replied. "He's old school, believes in proper corporate hierarchy, and Weston and Daniels follow his lead." He checked his watch. "We need to document every instance of Washington overstepping. Build a case methodically." James nodded, but his confidence had been shaken. Washington had outmaneuvered them easily, anticipating their moves and countering effectively. For the first time, James considered whether Richard's opposition might be futile, or worse, career-threatening, if Washington prevailed. Across the building, Marcus concluded a meeting with Sophia Kim and her newly formed innovation team. The energy in the room was electric, with engineers and developers eagerly contributing ideas that had been ignored for years under previous management. The rapid prototyping framework could cut development time by 40%, Sophia was saying, her eyes bright with excitement. "We've had the capability, just not the authorization to implement it." Marcus nodded. "Make it happen. I want a demonstration ready for the board in 2 weeks." As the team filed out, Tyler Reynolds hung back. "Mr. Washington, got a minute?" Marcus gestured to a chair. "What's on your mind, Tyler?" The developer shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to thank you for pushing through the security protocol update. It's been sitting in review for almost a year. It was clearly necessary, Marcus replied. The question is why it took so long to approve. Tyler hesitated, then decided to speak frankly. Mr. Peterson, Alex, he's not really technical. He relies heavily on what the sales team tells him about client priorities. And security wasn't a revenue generator, Marcus concluded. Exactly, Tyler said. Until it becomes a problem, then it's suddenly everyone's top priority. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. There's something else you should know. The engineering team, we're behind you. Way behind you. But there's a lot of fear about speaking up. Fear of what? Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. Repercussions. Before you came, people who challenged the status quo didn't last long. Passed over for promotions, assigned to dead-end projects, eventually pushed out. Marcus considered this. Thank you for telling me, Tyler. I want to create an environment where good ideas are valued regardless of where they come from. But I need people willing to speak up. That's just it, Tyler said. People are watching to see what happens to those of us who do. If we thrive, others will follow. If we get shut down, he shrugged. They'll know nothing's really changed. The conversation stayed with Marcus as he returned to his office. Tyler had articulated a crucial point. Cultural change couldn't be mandated through organizational charts or policy documents. It required visible examples of new behaviors being rewarded and old obstacles being removed, and some of those obstacles were people. Victoria knocked on his open door. Got a minute? Of course, Marcus replied, gesturing to a chair. What's up? The Davidson meeting was a success, I take it? Marcus nodded. Contract renewal is proceeding as scheduled. We've also opened discussions about expanded services. Victoria smiled briefly. Well done. But you should know, Richard's furious. He's meeting with his allies documenting what he's calling protocol violations. Let him, Marcus said. Results speak louder than protocol complaints. Normally, I'd agree, Victoria replied. But Richard has deep relationships with certain board members. They may be receptive to concerns about proper corporate governance, even if the outcomes are positive. Marcus leaned back, considering this. What would you suggest? Document everything, Victoria advised. Every decision, every justification, every outcome. Create a paper trail that demonstrates not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it. Sounds like you've been down this road before, Marcus observed. Victoria's expression grew somber. When you're often the only woman, and especially the only black woman, in leadership meetings, you learn to protect yourself. I've watched Richard sideline promising careers because people challenged his authority, including some who looked like us. The unspoken solidarity hung between them. Both understood the additional scrutiny and resistance they faced as black executives in a predominantly white company. Thank you, Victoria, Marcus said. Your insights are invaluable. After she left, Marcus reviewed the day's developments. The opposition was forming more quickly than he'd anticipated, but so was support from unexpected quarters. The technical teams, long ignored under Richard's leadership, were rallying behind changes that empowered their work. Junior executives who had been stifled were cautiously emerging to contribute. The real battle wasn't for control of the executive floor, it was for the soul of the company. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Washington, there's a Ms. Rivera here to see you. She says it's urgent. Marcus frowned. The name wasn't familiar. Send her in. A woman in her mid-30s entered, her professional demeanor belied by the tension in her shoulders. Mr. Washington, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I'm Elena Rivera, Director of Client Services. Of course, Marcus said, rising to shake her hand. What can I do for you? Elena hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. I should have scheduled properly, but I was concerned about documentation. Marcus gestured for her to sit. "Your concerns are safe here, Ms. Rivera." She took a deep breath. "Mr. Keller has instructed my team to delay implementation of service improvements for several key accounts, not the Davidson account," she added quickly, "but 3 others that are up for renewal in the next quarter." Marcus's expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. Did he explain why? "He said we need to prioritize resources during the transition period," Elena replied, her tone making clear she didn't believe this explanation. "But these aren't resource-intensive improvements. They're already developed and tested, just awaiting deployment." "I see," Marcus said. "And normally, who would authorize such deployments?" "That's just it," Elena said, frustration breaking through her professional composure. "It's my department's decision. We've never needed CFO approval for routine service enhancements. It feels like..." She stopped herself. "Like deliberate obstruction?" Marcus finished for her. Elena nodded, relieved he understood. "I've been with Meridian for 12 years, Mr. Washington. I believe in this company. But lately it feels like certain executives are more concerned with protecting their authority than serving our clients." Marcus studied her for a moment. Her decision to come forward carried significant risk, particularly if Richard maintained his influence. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Ms. Rivera. Would you be willing to provide me with specific details about these delayed implementations?" Elena pulled out a flash drive. "I've documented everything, the enhancements, their status, the unusual intervention, and the potential impact on client satisfaction." She placed it on his desk. "I should mention that I have indicated my concerns through proper channels first. I followed the process." "I appreciate your thoroughness," Marcus said, "and your courage." After Elena left, Marcus reviewed her documentation. It painted a damning picture of systematic obstruction. Richard was deliberately creating service problems that would coincide with Marcus's early leadership period. The strategy was clever but transparent: create customer dissatisfaction that would appear to result from Marcus's disruptive changes, then present this to the board as evidence of failed leadership. Marcus considered his options. He could confront Richard directly, but that would likely accelerate the conflict without resolving the underlying issue. He could appeal to the board, but without tangible harm to the company, they might view it as routine executive infighting. Or he could simply fix the problem. He pressed the intercom. "Could you ask Elena Rivera to return, please, and schedule a meeting with the client services team for later this afternoon?" By 5 o'clock, Marcus had authorized the delayed service implementations, provided Elena's team with direct escalation authority for similar situations, and instituted a new transparency policy requiring all service delays to be documented and justified. Word spread quickly through the company. By the next morning, 3 more department heads had come forward with similar accounts of unusual interventions from Richard's office, all creating subtle but significant obstacles to progress on Marcus's initiatives. A pattern was emerging, more insidious than Marcus had anticipated. Richard wasn't just resisting change, he was actively manufacturing failure. The strategy was as destructive as it was desperate, willing to damage the company to protect personal power. As Marcus prepared for his morning meetings, Richard appeared in his doorway, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professional concern. "Do you have a moment?" Richard asked, his tone deceptively casual. "I've been hearing some concerning reports about confusion in the ranks. It seems your direct approach with department heads is creating some process ambiguity." Marcus gestured to a chair. "Please come in. I'd be interested to hear your perspective on process." Richard settled into the chair, straightening his already perfect tie. "I've been at Meridian a long time, Marcus. I've seen leadership transitions before. The most successful ones respect established channels while gradually introducing change." "And the least successful?" Marcus asked. Richard smiled thinly. They tend to be brief. The threat was barely veiled, but Marcus didn't react. Instead, he opened his laptop and turned it toward Richard. I've been reviewing some interesting data, he said calmly. Service enhancements for the Westbrook, Nucor, and Pentagram accounts have been complete and ready for deployment for weeks, yet they were suddenly placed on hold after my arrival. Can you shed any light on that? The momentary flash of surprise in Richard's eyes confirmed what Marcus already knew. Resource allocation during transitions requires careful management, Richard replied smoothly. I'm simply ensuring we don't overcommit. I see, Marcus said. And did that concern extend to instructing the product team to delay the cloud security patch for our financial clients, the one that addresses the vulnerability identified last month? This time, Richard couldn't hide his surprise. I made a judgment call based on testing concerns. Interesting, Marcus replied. Because the testing was completed successfully 3 weeks ago. He closed his laptop. Richard, let me be direct. I understand your concerns about change, but manufacturing problems to undermine progress isn't just disloyal to me. It's harmful to Meridian and potentially dangerous for our clients. Richard's facade cracked, his composure giving way to a flash of genuine anger. You've been CEO for 3 days. 3 days. Yet you're dismantling systems and relationships that took years to build. I'm fixing what's broken, Marcus countered, and from where I sit, quite a lot is broken. For a moment, the two men stared at each other, the tension in the room palpable. Then Richard stood, buttoning his jacket. This conversation isn't productive. We clearly have different visions for Meridian's future. I suppose we'll see which one prevails. As he reached the door, Marcus spoke again. One more thing, Richard. The service enhancements for those 3 accounts have been approved and are being implemented today. I'd hate for there to be any further process confusion. Richard paused but didn't turn around. Without another word, he left. Marcus knew the confrontation had escalated the conflict beyond the point of reconciliation. Richard would intensify his opposition now, bringing every resource and relationship to bear against Marcus's leadership. The true test was just beginning. The next week unfolded like a high-stakes chess match. For every move Richard made, Marcus had a counter-move ready. When Richard delayed approval on Innovation Lab funding, Marcus implemented a temporary budget reallocation from his discretionary fund. When James attempted to exclude Marcus from key client calls, Marcus established a new client communication protocol that required CEO visibility on major accounts. By Friday, battle lines had been clearly drawn throughout the company. Most of the technical teams and middle management rallied behind Marcus's vision, energized by his responsiveness to long-ignored issues. Meanwhile, executives and managers who had thrived under the old system, predominantly those with close ties to Richard, formed a resistant bloc. What surprised Marcus wasn't the conflict itself, but its intensity. Richard's opposition had evolved from passive resistance to active sabotage with remarkable speed. The CFO seemed willing to risk significant company damage to maintain his position of influence. It's not just about control, Victoria explained during a private lunch meeting. It's about identity. Richard's entire self-worth is wrapped up in being the power behind the throne at Meridian. Your presence threatens that identity. Marcus considered this. There's more to it, though. The speed of his resistance, the personal nature of it. He let the thought hang in the air between them. Victoria met his gaze directly. You mean the fact that you're black? Yes. Victoria nodded slowly. Richard would never say it outright. He probably doesn't even acknowledge it to himself. But yes, it's a factor. I've been here before, Marcus said. At TechLight, my first 6 months were similar. resistance cloaked in concerns about experience and cultural fit. "How did you handle it?" Victoria asked. "Results," Marcus replied simply. "Irrefutable, measurable results that forced everyone to see beyond their preconceptions." Their conversation was interrupted by a call from Marcus's assistant. "Sir, there's an urgent situation in product development. Mr. Peterson is requesting your immediate presence." Marcus found Alex Peterson in the main development area, surrounded by agitated engineers. Tyler Reynolds stood nearby, arms crossed and expression grim. "What's happening?" Marcus asked as he approached. Alex turned, his face flushed with anger. "Your innovation team just pushed a code update without proper authorization. They've created a system conflict that's affecting 3 client platforms." Marcus turned to Tyler. "Is this accurate?" "Partially," Tyler replied evenly. "We implemented the security patch that was scheduled for deployment. The conflict arose because Alex's team made undocumented changes to the client integration layer last month." "Undocumented changes?" Marcus repeated. "A temporary fix," Alex interjected quickly. "Standard procedure for urgent client needs." Tyler shook his head. "Not standard and not temporary. They hard-coded workarounds instead of solving the underlying architecture issues. We've been warning about this for months." Marcus assessed the situation quickly. The tension in the room went beyond a technical disagreement. This was the conflict between old and new Meridian playing out in real time. "How serious is the client impact?" he asked. "Minor disruption to non-critical features," Tyler said. "We can resolve it within 2 hours. 4 hours minimum," Alex countered. "And that's assuming we roll back their unauthorized changes immediately." Marcus made a decision. "No rollbacks. Fix it moving forward. Tyler, I want your team and Alex's working together, in the same room, until this is resolved." He checked his watch. "I'll expect an update in 90 minutes. Alex sputtered. "But the protocol violation can be addressed after we fix the client impact," Marcus interrupted firmly. "Results first, process discussions later." As the teams grudgingly assembled to work on the solution, Marcus pulled Tyler aside. Was this deliberate? Pushing the update knowing it might cause conflicts? Tyler hesitated. "Not exactly. We knew there might be integration issues because of their undocumented changes. But we also knew the security vulnerability posed a greater risk than temporary feature disruption." "Next time, flag it to me first," Marcus said. "Don't give them ammunition." "Understood," Tyler nodded. "But you should know. Alex has been telling the team that your changes are temporary, that once you move on, things will go back to normal." Marcus absorbed this information silently. The implication was clear. Richard and his allies were positioning Marcus's leadership as a brief interruption rather than a permanent shift. Back in his office, Marcus found an email from Eleanor Fitzgerald requesting a call. He dialed her number immediately. "Marcus," Eleanor began without preamble, "I've been hearing some concerning reports. Richard reached out to several board members today about what he's calling destabilizing management practices." "I suspected he might," Marcus replied. "There was an incident in product development this morning. Minor client impact already being addressed. I'm guessing he's characterizing it as a major crisis." "Among other things," Eleanor confirmed. "He's painting a picture of reckless change without proper consideration of consequences. Harold Wilson is particularly concerned." Marcus wasn't surprised. "Eleanor, what's happening here is a classic resistance pattern. The teams that have been ignored or suppressed under previous leadership are finally addressing critical issues. That creates friction with those who preferred the status quo." "I understand that," Eleanor said, "but perception matters, especially with the board. Richard is a known quantity to them. You're still proving yourself." "What would you suggest?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Results, Eleanor said firmly. Concrete, measurable outcomes that validate your approach. The quarterly numbers go to the board in 3 weeks. Make sure they tell a story Richard can't undermine. After the call, Marcus sat at his desk, strategizing. Eleanor was right. He needed irrefutable evidence that his changes were benefiting the company. But 3 weeks was a tight timeline to demonstrate meaningful impact, especially with active resistance from the CFO. He needed to change the dynamics. The solution came from an unexpected source. Later that afternoon, as Marcus reviewed financial projections, Sophia Kim knocked on his door, tablet in hand. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I thought you should see this right away." She placed the tablet in front of him. On the screen was a competitive analysis of a major market opportunity that Meridian had seemingly overlooked. "The Archer Project," Marcus read. "Healthcare data integration platform." Sophia nodded eagerly. "It's a perfect fit for our capabilities, but we've never pursued healthcare contracts. Our sales team focuses exclusively on financial and industrial clients." Marcus scrolled through the analysis. The potential was significant. A $40 million initial contract with possibilities for expansion. "This is comprehensive work. When did you put this together?" "That's just it," Sophia replied. "We didn't. This analysis was completed 6 months ago by the strategic planning team. It was shelved because James Harrington said healthcare was too risky and outside our wheelhouse." "Do we have the technical capabilities?" Marcus asked. "Absolutely. In fact, we're better positioned than most competitors because of our security architecture. We'd need to complete HIPAA certification, but the infrastructure is already compliant." Marcus leaned back, considering the implications. "Who's the client?" "Nova Health Systems. They're modernizing their entire patient data infrastructure. The RFP closes in 2 weeks. Sophia hesitated. "There's one more thing you should know. The original analysis was led by Alicia Johnson. She was let go 3 months ago. Performance issues, according to HR. But the team says it was because she kept pushing this opportunity after James shot it down." The picture was becoming clearer. Meridian's leadership had systematically suppressed innovation and new market opportunities that didn't align with their comfort zone, even firing those who challenged the limitations. "Get me everything on this," Marcus said. "The original analysis, Nova's RFP requirements, our capability assessment, and find Alicia Johnson. I want to speak with her." The next morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting with Victoria, Sophia, and several key technical leads. Notably absent were Richard James and their allies. "We have an opportunity," Marcus began, displaying Sophia's findings. "Nova Health Systems represents not just a major contract, but entry into an entirely new market sector. We have 2 weeks to prepare a proposal." For the next hour, they dissected the requirements and Meridian's capabilities. The team's energy was palpable. This was exactly the kind of challenge many of them had been craving. "We can do this," Sophia asserted. "The technical framework is solid. We just need to finalize the healthcare-specific components." "What about sales?" someone asked. "Healthcare has different procurement processes than our usual clients." Marcus smiled. "I've reached out to Alicia Johnson. She's joining us tomorrow as a consultant. Her healthcare industry knowledge will be invaluable." Victoria raised a practical concern. "James will fight this. He'll say we're diluting our focus, stretching resources too thin." "Which is why we're not going through the usual channels," Marcus replied. "I'm establishing a special projects team reporting directly to me. We'll use resources from the Innovation Lab budget, which I control." The implications were clear. They were bypassing the traditional power structure entirely. Later that day, word of the Nova initiative reached Richard. He stormed into Marcus's office without knocking. "You're pursuing a healthcare contract?" he demanded, Without consulting the executive team, Marcus looked up calmly from his computer. Nova Health Systems, yes. This is exactly what I've been telling the board about, Richard said, barely containing his anger. Reckless decisions without proper diligence. Healthcare is heavily regulated, completely different from our core business. The diligence was completed 6 months ago, Marcus replied. Your team shelved it, and our security architecture is already HIPAA-compatible. Richard faltered momentarily, then regrouped. James has decades of experience in client assessment. If he determined it was too risky, there were good reasons. Such as, Richard waved dismissively, technical complexity, regulatory hurdles, specialized sales requirements. All addressed in the original analysis, Marcus countered. The real risk was never technical. It was psychological, the fear of moving beyond comfortable established patterns. The board won't approve this, Richard said, switching tactics, not without full executive committee review. The board doesn't need to approve individual contract pursuits, Marcus replied, and I've already briefed Eleanor. She's quite interested in the potential for market diversification. Richard's face flushed. You went directly to Eleanor? Just as you went directly to Harold, Marcus said pointedly. For a moment, Richard seemed at a loss. Then his expression hardened. You're isolating yourself, Marcus. Building a faction rather than leading a unified company. That approach has consequences. I'm unifying those committed to Meridian's future, Marcus corrected. The resistance is coming from those more committed to preserving their personal influence. Richard stared at him, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused. You know, when the board selected you, I had concerns, but I kept them to myself, gave you the benefit of the doubt. I'm beginning to think that was a mistake. The implied threat hung in the air between them. The mistake, Marcus replied evenly, was assuming that my appointment was symbolic rather than substantive. I was hired to transform Meridian, Richard. That's exactly what I'm doing. After Richard left, Marcus sat quietly, weighing his next moves. The Nova proposal represented more than just a business opportunity. It was a direct challenge to the old power structure. If successful, it would demonstrate not only the viability of his vision, but also the unnecessary limitations the previous leadership had imposed. But Richard's parting words concerned him. The veiled reference to Marcus's selection suggested that the conflict was indeed taking on racial dimensions. Richard might not explicitly mention race, but the subtext was clear, questioning whether Marcus had been hired for his capabilities or for diversity optics. It was a familiar tactic, one Marcus had encountered throughout his career, the implication that his achievements were somehow less earned, his position less deserved. He wouldn't give it power. Instead, he would focus on what had always been his most effective response, excellence that couldn't be denied or diminished. The Nova proposal would be flawless, and it would change everything. The transformation of Conference Room C into Nova Proposal Headquarters happened almost overnight. Walls covered with diagrams and specifications, workstations clustered around the massive table, team members coming and going at all hours. The energy was palpable. Marcus had created what amounted to a company within the company, free from the bureaucratic constraints that had stifled innovation. Alicia Johnson, the analyst who'd been fired for championing the healthcare opportunity, proved invaluable. A brilliant strategist with deep industry connections, she provided insights that sharpened their approach considerably. On her first day back, she'd been hesitant, wounded by her previous experience. By the third day, she was leading technical discussions with confident authority. Nova's biggest pain point isn't the technology itself, she explained during the morning briefing. It's integration anxiety. Their leadership is terrified of disrupting patient care during the transition. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. So we need to emphasize our staged implementation approach. Exactly, Alicia agreed. Our phase security architecture is actually perfect for this. We can migrate their most sensitive systems last after the framework is proven. The team worked with remarkable cohesion, fueled by a shared mission and freedom from the political maneuvering that had previously consumed their energy. Marcus split his time between the Nova project and his regular CEO duties, careful not to neglect the broader organization despite the temptation to focus exclusively on the proposal. Meanwhile, Richard's opposition had evolved into a sophisticated campaign. What began as procedural objections had transformed into a comprehensive narrative, questioning Marcus's judgment, experience, and understanding of Meridian's business model. "He's meeting with board members individually," Victoria reported during a private update, "carefully framing your initiatives as reckless experiments that threaten the company's stability." Marcus wasn't surprised. What's his most effective argument? That you're prioritizing flashy innovation over core business fundamentals, Victoria replied. He's positioning the Nova pursuit as evidence of dangerous distraction, claiming you're neglecting existing clients to chase an opportunity outside our expertise. Marcus absorbed this. Who's receptive to this framing? Harold Wilson, primarily. 2 others are wavering. Eleanor remains firmly in your corner, and 3 others seem neutral, waiting for results before judging. The stakes were clear. If the Nova proposal failed, Richard would use it to bolster his narrative that Marcus was steering Meridian toward disaster. If it succeeded, the victory would neutralize much of Richard's opposition. By the end of the first week, word of the special project had spread throughout the company. Richard's allies characterized it as a risky vanity project. But for many employees, particularly those who had felt stifled under the previous leadership, it represented something more profound: possibility. Junior engineers started dropping by Conference Room C after hours, offering suggestions or assistance. Marketing specialists volunteered insights about healthcare industry messaging. Even some mid-level managers from James's sales team discreetly provided competitive intelligence about other bidders for the Nova contract. The groundswell of support surprised even Marcus. It wasn't just about one project or contract. It was about the culture shift he represented. People who had been told for years to stay in their lane, to follow established protocols regardless of their effectiveness, suddenly saw a leader validating their ideas and encouraging their initiative. But as support for Marcus grew, so did the desperation of his opposition. On Wednesday afternoon, as the Nova proposal neared completion, Sophia burst into Marcus's office, her typically calm demeanor visibly shaken. "Someone accessed our secure server," she said without preamble. "The Nova files have been copied." Marcus set down his pen. "When?" "Last night, between 2 and 3 a.m. The system logs show administrator credentials were used." "Who has that level of access?" Sophia hesitated. "Only 3 people. Me, our security director, and Richard." Marcus finished for her. As CFO, Richard maintained administrator access to all company systems, a legacy of his de facto leadership role before Marcus arrived. "We can't prove it was him," Sophia cautioned. "The logs only show the credentials were used, not who used them." Marcus considered the implications. What exactly was accessed? "Everything: our technical approach, pricing strategy, implementation timeline." Sophia's voice tightened. "If this gets to another bidder, we're compromised." The move was as desperate as it was unethical. Richard, or someone acting on his behalf, had crossed a line from organizational politics into potential corporate espionage. Even if the Nova proposal wasn't leaked externally, the mere act of accessing it demonstrated how far Richard was willing to go to undermine Marcus's leadership. "Lock down the server," Marcus instructed. "Change all administrative passwords immediately, and prepare a full security audit report. I want documented evidence of the breach." After Sophia left, Marcus sat at his desk, weighing his options. He could confront Richard directly, but without irrefutable proof of his involvement, it would only lead to denials and counter-accusations. He could report the breach to the board, but without knowing Richard's strategy, he risked playing into a trap. Before he could decide, his assistant buzzed the intercom. "Sir, Mr. Keller has called an emergency executive meeting in the main conference room. He's claiming authority under the company bylaws for situations of urgent financial concern." Marcus checked the time. 4:30 p.m. The timing wasn't coincidental. Richard was making his move. When Marcus arrived at the conference room, he found the entire executive team already assembled. Richard stood at the head of the table, a deliberate power position, with James and Elizabeth flanking him. Victoria sat opposite them, her expression cautiously neutral, but her eyes conveying a warning. Alex Peterson and 2 other division heads completed the group, their uncertain expressions suggesting they weren't fully privy to Richard's agenda. "Marcus," Richard greeted him with artificial cordiality, "thank you for joining us. I've called this meeting under Section 4.2 of the company bylaws, which authorizes the CFO to convene leadership in situations of material financial concern." Marcus remained standing, deliberately not taking a seat. "What's the concern, Richard?" Richard's smile was thin. "Several issues, actually. First, the unauthorized allocation of significant resources to a speculative project outside our core business. Second, the isolation of key personnel in a manner that's disrupting normal operations. And third," he paused for effect, "the potential misuse of proprietary client information." The last accusation hung in the air. Marcus kept his expression neutral, though he immediately understood Richard's strategy. Having accessed the Nova proposal files, Richard now planned to accuse Marcus of the very breach he or his allies had committed. "That's a serious set of allegations," Marcus said evenly. "I assume you have specific evidence to support them." Richard nodded to James, who distributed folders to everyone at the table. "The financial impact analysis is quite concerning," Richard continued. "Resources diverted from established clients, staff reassigned without proper authorization, expenses incurred without executive committee approval." Marcus didn't bother opening the folder. "The CEO has explicit authority to allocate resources to strategic initiatives. Nothing in the Nova project exceeds those parameters." "The Nova project," Richard repeated, feigning surprise. "Interesting that you immediately assumed that's what I was referring to." It was a clumsy trap, and Marcus didn't take the bait. "It's the only special project currently in development, Richard. Let's not play games." "This isn't a game," Richard countered, his voice hardening. "It's about responsible governance. You've been pursuing a healthcare contract without the necessary expertise, regulatory compliance, or board approval. The necessary expertise is precisely what Alicia Johnson brings to the team," Marcus replied. "The regulatory compliance is already built into our security architecture, and board approval isn't required for pursuing a contract opportunity." Richard's expression tightened. Alicia Johnson was terminated for performance issues. Bringing her back without HR review is a violation of company policy. "She was terminated for challenging the status quo," Marcus corrected. "Her performance issues began when she identified an opportunity that you and James weren't comfortable pursuing." James leaned forward. "That's completely false. Her analysis was flawed, her projections unrealistic." "Then you won't mind if we present both her original analysis and our current proposal to the board for an objective assessment," Marcus suggested. Richard quickly interjected. "The immediate concern is the misappropriation of resources and the disruption to our core business. The executive committee needs to vote on whether to continue this project or redirect efforts back to established clients." Marcus understood the maneuver. Richard was attempting to use the executive committee, where he still commanded majority support, to override the CEO's authority. It was a direct challenge, carefully constructed to appear as responsible oversight rather than a power grab. The executive committee doesn't have authority to override CEO directives on strategic initiatives, Marcus stated firmly. But more importantly, this manufactured crisis ignores the real breach that occurred last night. Richard frowned. What breach? Someone using administrator credentials accessed the Nova project files at 2:17 a.m., Marcus said, watching Richard's reaction carefully. The security logs have been preserved and are being analyzed as we speak. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Richard's face, quickly masked. All senior executives have access to company servers. There's nothing improper about reviewing active projects. Administrator access logs are tied to specific credentials, Marcus pointed out, and unauthorized access to restricted project files is explicitly prohibited under our security protocols. Victoria spoke for the first time. If there's evidence of a security breach, that should be our primary concern, particularly if it involves proprietary client information. Richard's jaw tightened. He hadn't anticipated Marcus knowing about the server access so quickly, and certainly hadn't expected him to bring it up in this forum. His carefully orchestrated ambush was unraveling. "We seem to be getting sidetracked," Richard said, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "The purpose of this meeting is to address the resource allocation concerns, which are entirely within my authority as CEO," Marcus interrupted. "What's not within anyone's authority is accessing secured project files without proper clearance. So let me be clear. A full security audit is underway. If it reveals improper access, there will be consequences, regardless of position." The threat hung in the air, transforming the dynamic of the meeting. What Richard had intended as a show of strength had become a defensive posture. Alex Peterson, who had been quiet until now, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should postpone this discussion until we have more complete information, both about the resource concerns and the security questions." It was a diplomatic suggestion, offering Richard a graceful exit. Marcus nodded agreement. "That seems reasonable." Richard had little choice but to concede. "Fine. We'll reconvene when the relevant reports are available." He gathered his papers with barely concealed anger. But this discussion isn't over. As the meeting disbanded, Victoria lingered behind with Marcus. "That was a calculated attack," she said quietly. "He's getting desperate." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "And desperate people make mistakes." "The server access was sloppy," Victoria observed, "and almost as if he wanted you to know." Marcus considered this. "Or someone wanted me to know that Richard was behind it." "You think he's being set up?" "I think the dynamics are more complex than they appear," Marcus replied. "Not everyone aligned with Richard shares his methods or his motivations." Later that evening, as Marcus worked late finalizing the Nova proposal, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Parking garage, level B2, 10 minutes, come alone." Anonymous messages requesting clandestine meetings weren't standard business practice, even at Meridian. But Marcus's instincts told him this wasn't a trap, at least not a physical one. The parking garage was dimly lit and mostly empty when Marcus arrived. Near the far wall, a figure waited beside a concrete pillar. As Marcus approached, he recognized Elizabeth Chen, Meridian's chief marketing officer and one of Richard's staunchest allies. "Thank you for coming," Elizabeth said, her voice low. "I can't be seen talking to you." "What's this about?" Marcus asked. Elizabeth glanced nervously toward the elevator. "Richard's gone too far. The server breach wasn't his idea, it was James, but Richard approved it. They're planning to leak portions of your proposal to another bidder." Marcus studied her carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because crossing that line is corporate suicide," Elizabeth replied. "I've supported Richard because I believed he had Meridian's best interests at heart. But this," she shook her head, "this is just vindictive. It's not about the company anymore." "Do you have proof?" Marcus asked. "No," Elizabeth admitted, "but I was there when they discussed it. They're meeting a contact from Greenfield Tech tomorrow night." The revelation wasn't entirely surprising, but the source was. Elizabeth had been firmly in Richard's camp from the beginning. Her defection suggested the opposition was fracturing under the pressure of Richard's increasingly extreme tactics. "Why should I believe you?" Marcus asked directly. "You've opposed every change I've tried to make." Elizabeth met his gaze. "I've opposed changes I thought were too disruptive. That's my job, to protect our brand, our market position. But sabotaging our own proposal, deliberately harming the company to win a power struggle, I never signed up for that." Marcus nodded slowly. "Thank you for the information." As he turned to leave, Elizabeth added, "There's something else you should know. This morning, Richard told us the board is meeting next week to reconsider leadership direction. He claims he has the votes to recommend your removal." The statement hung in the air between them. "Is that true?" Marcus asked. "Does he have the votes?" "I don't know," Elizabeth replied honestly, "but he believes he does." The implications were clear. The Nova proposal wasn't just about a new market opportunity anymore. It represented Marcus's best chance at securing his position. If he could deliver it successfully before the board meeting, Richard's argument would collapse. The timeline had just compressed dramatically. What was already a challenge had become a race against time. Thursday morning dawned with a new urgency. Marcus arrived at the office before 6 a.m., summoning his most trusted allies to an emergency strategy session. "The timeline has accelerated," he told Victoria, Sophia, and Tyler. "We need to complete the Nova proposal by tomorrow night, not next week." Victoria frowned. "That's barely 36 hours. Is it even possible?" "It has to be," Marcus replied. "But the proposal is only part of our challenge. We also need to address the security breach and prevent the planned leak." He briefed them on Elizabeth's warning about Richard and James's plan to share proprietary information with Greenfield Tech, a direct competitor. The revelation stunned even Victoria, who had witnessed many corporate power struggles. "That crosses the line from unethical to illegal," she said. "Corporate espionage has serious legal consequences." "Which is why we need irrefutable evidence," Marcus noted. "Accusations without proof would only deepen the division and potentially backfire." Sophia spoke up. "I can enhance security logging on all systems. If they attempt another access or try to export files, we'll have a detailed record." "Good," Marcus nodded. "But we also need to protect the Nova proposal itself. Create a secure partition with restricted access. Only the core team gets in. And implement a digital watermark on all documents. If any of our material appears elsewhere, we'll know the source." Tyler hesitated before speaking. "There's another option. We could plant deliberately misleading information in an accessible version of the proposal. If that specific misinformation appears in a competitor's approach, we'd have definitive proof of the leak." Marcus considered this. A canary trap. Clever, but risky. If the fake information is too obvious, they'll spot it. If it's too subtle, it won't be identifiable as our material. "I think we can thread that needle," Tyler insisted. "A few specifically worded sections. Unique technical approaches that would only come from our team." "Do it," Marcus decided. "But keep the real proposal completely segregated." As the meeting concluded, Marcus added one final instruction. "This stays between us. As far as everyone else is concerned, we're simply accelerating our timeline due to competitive pressure." The day unfolded in a blur of activity. The Nova team worked with renewed intensity, fueled by both the compressed timeline and the knowledge that they were fighting for more than just a contract. Word had spread through subtle channels that the special project had become a proxy battle for Meridian's future direction. By midday, Marcus received a text from Elizabeth. Meeting confirmed, 8 p.m., Trenton Hotel Bar. The information gave him a critical advantage, knowledge of exactly when and where the planned corporate espionage would occur. But it also presented a dilemma. Directly confronting Richard and James would alert them that they had a leak in their inner circle. Involving law enforcement might be premature without concrete evidence of an actual information transfer. Victoria advocated for caution. If we move too soon, we lose the opportunity to catch them in the act. If we wait too long, the damage is done. Marcus weighed the options carefully. We need witnesses and documentation, irrefutable evidence that would stand up to board scrutiny or legal challenge. By mid-afternoon, they had formulated a plan. Marcus authorized a small security team to discreetly monitor the meeting. Victoria prepared the necessary legal documentation to address potential corporate espionage charges. Meanwhile, the Nova proposal continued to take shape, with Alicia Johnson's healthcare expertise providing critical insights that strengthened their approach. At 6 p.m., Marcus received another unexpected visitor, Alex Peterson. "Got a minute?" Alex asked, hovering in the doorway of Marcus's office. "Of course," Marcus replied, gesturing to a chair. "What's on your mind?" Alex closed the door behind him, his typical brash confidence noticeably diminished. "I heard some things today that concerned me. About Richard and James." Marcus waited silently, giving Alex space to continue. "They're talking about leaking our proprietary information to competitors," Alex said finally. "I know we've had our differences, but that crosses a line I'm not comfortable with." "I appreciate you coming forward," Marcus said. "May I ask what prompted this?" Alex shifted uncomfortably. "I've been with Meridian for 12 years. I've disagreed with directions, strategies, leadership decisions. But I've always believed we were acting in the company's best interest." He looked up, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. "This isn't about Meridian anymore. It's about Richard's ego, his need to be in control." The defection of another key Richard ally was significant, not just for the information Alex might provide, but for what it represented. The coalition opposing Marcus was fracturing as Richard's tactics became increasingly extreme. "What exactly did you hear?" Marcus asked. "James is meeting someone from Greenfield tonight. He has a copy of our Nova proposal, or at least parts of it. Richard authorized it." Alex's expression was troubled. "They're trying to sabotage our bid because if it succeeds, your position becomes unassailable." It confirmed what Elizabeth had already revealed, but coming from Alex, it carried additional weight. "Would you be willing to document what you've told me?" Marcus asked. Alex hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, this isn't what I signed up for." By 7:30 p.m., the pieces were in place. A small security team with recording equipment was positioned near the Trenton Hotel Bar. Victoria waited in a car nearby with legal documents prepared. Marcus remained at the office coordinating the operation while maintaining plausible deniability. At 7:45, his phone buzzed with a message from the security team. Subject 1 arrived, seated at corner table. James had arrived early, securing a private location for the clandestine meeting. 15 minutes later, another update. Subject 2 has arrived. Exchange in progress. The moment of truth had arrived. James was meeting with the Greenfield representative, potentially transferring Meridian's confidential information. The evidence being gathered would either vindicate Marcus's concerns or prove them unfounded. At 8:30, his phone rang. Victoria's voice was taut with controlled excitement. "We got it. Clear audio and video of James passing documents and a flash drive." The Greenfield rep explicitly acknowledged receiving Meridian's proprietary information. "Any mention of Richard?" Marcus asked. James specifically stated the CFO had authorized the exchange. Victoria confirmed. "We have everything we need." Marcus exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation settling on him. "No immediate action. Let them complete the meeting. We'll address this through proper channels tomorrow." "Agreed," Victoria said. "This needs to be handled carefully." As Marcus ended the call, he felt no triumph, only a somber recognition of how far Richard's resistance had gone. What had begun as organizational politics had descended into potentially criminal behavior. The implications would reverberate beyond their personal conflict to affect the entire company. By 9 p.m., the security team confirmed the meeting had concluded. James and the Greenfield representative had parted ways, evidence of their transaction secured by Meridian's security team. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning, but tonight, the focus remained on completing the Nova proposal. Marcus returned to Conference Room C, where the team continued working despite the late hour. Their dedication moved him, not just to the project, but to the vision of what Meridian could become. "How are we progressing?" he asked Sophia. "Finalizing the technical architecture section now," she replied. "Alicia's healthcare compliance framework is brilliant. It addresses regulatory concerns while maintaining efficiency." Marcus reviewed the latest draft, impressed by the quality achieved under such intense pressure. "This is exceptional work," he told the team. "Not just the content, but your commitment to excellence despite the circumstances." As midnight approached, Marcus sent most of the team home to rest. "We'll reconvene at 7 a.m. The proposal goes out tomorrow afternoon. No exceptions." Left alone in the conference room, Marcus surveyed the wall of diagrams, specifications, and strategies they had assembled. The Nova proposal represented more than a potential contract. It embodied a different vision for Meridian, one that valued innovation over comfort, merit over politics, and future potential over past patterns. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Board meeting confirmed for Monday. Richard pushing hard for leadership review. Need compelling counter-evidence." The timeline was now concrete. Monday's board meeting would determine not just Marcus's future at Meridian, but the company's direction for years to come. The Nova proposal had to be submitted tomorrow. The evidence of Richard and James's corporate espionage would need to be presented carefully, without appearing as a vindictive counterattack. Most critically, Marcus needed to demonstrate that his leadership was already producing positive results, that the changes he'd implemented were strengthening Meridian, not destabilizing it. He worked through the night, preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most consequential confrontation of his professional career. By dawn, he had formulated a comprehensive strategy, one that addressed not just the immediate crisis, but the longer-term cultural transformation Meridian required. As the first members of the Nova team began arriving, bleary-eyed but determined, Marcus greeted them with calm confidence. "Today, we finish what we started," he told them. "Not just a proposal, but a new chapter for Meridian." Tyler arrived with fresh coffee for the team and a flash drive for Marcus. "The canary trap worked," he said quietly. "Our security logs show they accessed the decoy files yesterday afternoon. If they shared that version with Greenfield, the evidence will be unmistakable." The morning unfolded with methodical efficiency as the team incorporated final revisions and quality checks. By noon, the Nova proposal was complete, a comprehensive, innovative approach to healthcare data integration that showcased Meridian's technical capabilities while addressing the specific concerns of Nova Health Systems. As the team celebrated this milestone, Marcus received a call from Victoria. "We've reviewed the surveillance evidence," she reported. It's conclusive. James explicitly stated he was acting on Richard's instructions and characterized the information sharing as a strategy to neutralize the threat Washington poses to our leadership. Perfect timing, Marcus replied. The NOVA proposal is complete. We're submitting it within the hour. What about Richard and James? Victoria asked. Marcus considered his next steps carefully. Immediate termination might seem justified, but it could also appear reactive or vindictive to the board. More importantly, it would deprive him of the opportunity to address the situation with the entire executive team present. A critical moment for establishing the cultural expectations of his leadership. We handle this by the book, Marcus decided. Document everything. Prepare the evidence for presentation. I'll call an executive meeting for tomorrow morning. After ending the call, Marcus returned to the NOVA team for the final review. As they prepared to submit the proposal, he addressed the group. What you've accomplished here goes beyond a single contract bid. You've demonstrated what Meridian is capable of when artificial barriers are removed and talent is unleashed. He looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. Remember this moment. This is the Meridian we're building together. At precisely 2 p.m., they submitted the NOVA Health Systems proposal, ahead of the deadline and, according to Alicia's industry contacts, substantially stronger than any competing bid. The first battle was complete. Now came the war. Friday morning arrived with an air of inevitability. Marcus had scheduled the executive meeting for 9 a.m., late enough for thorough preparation, early enough to address the situation before weekend dispersal. Victoria had arranged for security personnel to be stationed discreetly outside the conference room. Legal documentation had been prepared, evidence organized, and contingency plans established. "Are you ready for this?" Victoria asked as they reviewed the final preparations. "As ready as possible," Marcus replied. "How's the team handling the NOVA submission?" "Excited but exhausted," Victoria said. "Sophia's keeping them focused on post-submission analytics. If NOVA has questions, we want immediate responses." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good. This meeting is critical, but we can't lose momentum on NOVA." By 8:45, executives began arriving for the meeting. Elizabeth and Alex entered separately, their expressions tense but resolved. Others filed in with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. The hastily called Friday meeting was unusual, especially with the cryptic agenda. Urgent governance matter. At 8:55, James arrived, his typical swagger somewhat diminished. He nodded curtly to Marcus before taking his seat. Richard was the last to enter, precisely at 9 a.m. His expression betrayed nothing as he surveyed the room, noting the unusual presence of Meridian's head of security standing quietly in the corner. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began once everyone was seated. "I've called this meeting to address a serious matter affecting Meridian's governance, security, and future." Richard shifted slightly in his chair. "Before we begin, I should note that I've scheduled a special board meeting for Monday morning. There are significant concerns about current leadership direction that require immediate attention." It was a preemptive strike, an attempt to undermine the authority of whatever Marcus was about to present. Marcus acknowledged it with a slight nod. "The board meeting is indeed scheduled," he confirmed, "and it's directly relevant to what we're discussing today." He gestured to Victoria, who distributed sealed folders to each executive. "Please don't open these yet." Richard's eyes narrowed. "What exactly are we discussing, Marcus?" "Corporate espionage," Marcus replied evenly. "Specifically, the deliberate theft and transfer of Meridian's proprietary information to a direct competitor." The room went perfectly still. James's face drained of color. Richard maintained his composure, though a muscle twitched almost imperceptibly in his jaw. "That's a serious accusation," Richard said after a moment. "I assume you have evidence?" Substantial evidence, Marcus confirmed. Before I present it, I want to be clear. Meridian has always valued integrity, even during periods of disagreement or transition. The actions we're addressing today represent a fundamental betrayal of that value. He nodded to the head of security, who activated the conference room display. Last night at approximately 8:15 p.m., a meeting took place at the Trenton Hotel. During this meeting, confidential Meridian information was transferred to a representative from Greenfield Tech, one of our direct competitors. The screen displayed a crystal-clear image from the hotel bar. James Harrington was clearly visible, passing a folder and flash drive to another man. "This is outrageous," James sputtered. "Private surveillance? Is this what Meridian has become under your leadership?" "The surveillance was authorized under Section 7.3 of our security protocols," Victoria interjected smoothly. "Specifically, monitoring of suspected corporate espionage activities," Marcus continued with clinical precision. "The documents transferred contain proprietary information about Meridian's technical approach to the Nova Health Systems proposal, information that was accessed without authorization from secure servers on Wednesday night." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Elizabeth and Alex remained silent, their prior knowledge evident in their lack of surprise. Richard leaned forward. "This is a mischaracterization of legitimate business intelligence gathering. James was conducting authorized competitive research." "Is that why the meeting was conducted off-site, after hours, with explicit acknowledgement that the information was proprietary?" Marcus asked. He nodded to the security chief, who played an audio recording. James's voice filled the room. "This is Meridian's complete technical approach. The CFO authorized this specifically to prevent Washington from gaining traction with the board. If Greenfield submits competing elements before Monday's board meeting, Washington's initiative looks less innovative, less special." The Greenfield representative's response was equally damning. "And you're sure this won't be traced back to either of us? This level of proprietary information transfer could have serious legal implications." James again. "Richard has arranged everything. The server access can't be traced specifically to us, and we've insulated ourselves from direct connection." As the recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Richard's face had hardened into a mask of controlled anger. James stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "You may now open the folders," Marcus instructed. "They contain complete documentation of the server breach, the surveillance operation, and relevant company policies regarding intellectual property protection and corporate espionage." As the executives reviewed the materials, Marcus continued, "To be absolutely clear, this isn't about organizational disagreement or leadership style differences. This is about actions that potentially violate federal law, breach fiduciary duty, and fundamentally damage Meridian's interests." Richard finally spoke, his voice controlled but tense. "This manufactured evidence conveniently appears just before a board meeting where your leadership is being questioned. The timing is suspicious at best, malicious at worst." "The timing wasn't my choice," Marcus replied evenly. "You set the schedule when you accessed secure servers and arranged last night's meeting." Richard turned to the other executives. "This is a witch hunt designed to distract from Washington's reckless agenda. He's targeting anyone who questions his authority." For a moment it seemed Richard might rally support. Then Elizabeth spoke up. "I was there when you planned this, Richard," she said quietly. "In your office on Wednesday, you and James specifically discussed using the Nova information to undermine Marcus before the board meeting." Richard's head snapped toward her, shock and betrayal evident in his expression. "You." "She's not the only one," Alex added, finding his voice. "I heard it too. This crossed a line, Richard. This isn't about protecting Meridian, it's about protecting your control." The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Richard's support had collapsed, leaving him and James isolated in their actions. Marcus allowed the moment to breathe before continuing. I have a responsibility to address this situation appropriately. Effective immediately, both Richard Keller and James Harrington are suspended pending a full investigation. Security will escort you to collect personal belongings, after which you'll leave the premises. Your system access has already been revoked. Richard stood abruptly. You don't have the authority. The board has already been notified, Marcus interrupted. Eleanor Fitzgerald and 2 other members reviewed the evidence last night. They authorized the suspension while withholding judgment on final consequences pending Monday's full board review. It was the final piece of Marcus's strategy, securing board support before the confrontation. Richard had been outmaneuvered at every turn. This isn't over, Richard said, his voice low and threatening. You think you've won, but you've only revealed your true character, ruthless, calculating, willing to destroy careers to get your way. Marcus met his gaze steadily. What's been revealed today is a pattern of behavior that prioritizes personal power over company interest. That's not leadership, Richard. It's self-preservation at Meridian's expense. As security personnel approached, Richard buttoned his jacket with deliberate dignity. The board will hear my side on Monday. This overreach will only confirm what I've been saying about your leadership. The board will have all the facts, Marcus agreed, including the completed Nova proposal, the security breach evidence, and testimony from executives who witnessed your planning. They'll make their decision based on what best serves Meridian's future, not individual egos. After Richard and James were escorted out, Marcus addressed the remaining executives. This is an unfortunate situation, but also an opportunity to reset our cultural expectations. Meridian thrives on innovation, integrity, and mutual respect. Those aren't just words. They're standards that apply to everyone, regardless of position or tenure. The meeting concluded with a subdued recognition of the magnitude of what had transpired. A long-standing power structure had been dismantled not through gradual transition, but through decisive action necessitated by ethical breaches. Throughout the day, word of the morning's events spread through the company. Marcus made no effort to control the narrative beyond a factual all-staff email acknowledging the suspensions and assuring employees that business operations would continue normally. By late afternoon, the office had settled into a strange calm like the stillness after a thunderstorm. Victoria found Marcus in his office, reviewing preparations for Monday's board meeting. The Nova team received a request for clarification from the client, she reported. Sophia and Alicia handled it immediately. They said the question suggested serious interest. Marcus nodded. Good. Any update from the board? Eleanor called. She's fielded calls from several board members after Richard reached out to them. She's holding firm on the suspension, but warns that Monday will be challenging. I expected as much, Marcus replied. Richard's had years to cultivate those relationships. They won't dissolve overnight. Victoria studied him thoughtfully. You know he's going to make this about race, don't you? Not explicitly, but it will be there in the subtext. The narrative of the aggressive black CEO overreaching his authority, pushing out experienced leadership. Marcus met her gaze. Of course. That's been the undercurrent from the beginning. Every decision questioned, every change resisted, not just because it was different, but because I was different. How will you address it? Victoria asked. The same way I always have, Marcus replied, with irrefutable results that make such questions irrelevant. The Nova proposal, the financial projections, the employee engagement metrics, they all tell a clear story that has nothing to do with race and everything to do with effective leadership. Victoria nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I've been at Meridian longer than almost anyone in that boardroom. What you've accomplished in a few weeks has been transformative, not just strategically but culturally. People who had given up on being heard are contributing again. That's the real measure, Marcus agreed. Not quarterly numbers or stock prices, but whether we're building an organization where talent can flourish regardless of title or background. As Friday evening approached, Marcus received a call from Nova Health Systems. The proposal submission had been acknowledged, with a preliminary review scheduled for early next week. It was a positive sign, though far from a definitive outcome. Looking out over the city skyline from his office window, Marcus reflected on the week's events. In just days, he had completed a major proposal, exposed a serious ethical breach, and fundamentally altered Meridian's power dynamics. Monday's board meeting would determine whether these changes became permanent or were reversed in favor of the status quo. The stakes extended beyond his personal career or even Meridian's business prospects. What hung in the balance was a more fundamental question. Could organizations truly change, or would they inevitably revert to familiar patterns, comfortable biases, and established hierarchies? Monday would provide an answer, not just for Marcus Washington, but for everyone at Meridian who had dared to believe in the possibility of transformation. Monday morning arrived with a weight of anticipation. The weekend had passed in a flurry of preparation, Marcus and his team assembling comprehensive documentation of both achievements and future plans, while Richard undoubtedly rallied his board allies for a final stand. Marcus arrived at Meridian headquarters earlier than usual, wanting a quiet moment to center himself before the day's challenges. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., leaving him time to check on the Nova team and review his presentation one last time. He found Sophia already in the office, monitoring responses from Nova Health Systems. "They've requested a follow-up presentation," she reported, unable to contain her excitement. "Their procurement team was particularly impressed with our security architecture and compliance framework. That's practically unheard of at this stage." "Excellent work," Marcus replied. "When is the presentation scheduled?" "Wednesday morning," Sophia said. "They've accelerated their timeline. Word is their CEO wants to fast-track the implementation." It was a significant vote of confidence, one that would strengthen Marcus's position with the board considerably. But he knew better than to count on a contract that wasn't yet signed. Today's meeting would be decided on more than just the Nova opportunity. As 9:30 approached, Marcus made his way to the executive floor. Victoria was waiting outside the boardroom, impeccably dressed and projecting the calm confidence that had made her such a valuable ally. "Ready?" she asked simply. Marcus nodded. "Status update?" "All board members are present or arriving shortly," Victoria reported. "Eleanor has maintained order so far, but Harold Wilson has been vocal about procedural concerns. Richard arrived 15 minutes ago and has been speaking privately with several board members." "And our supporters?" "Eleanor is solid. Martinez and Johnson seem to be in your corner. The others are waiting to hear both sides." Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Board members clustered in small groups, conversations hushing as Marcus entered. Richard sat alone at one end of the table, his posture rigid but determined. At precisely 10 a.m., Eleanor Fitzgerald called the meeting to order. "Good morning, everyone. Today's agenda is straightforward but consequential. We're reviewing two significant matters. First, the suspension of CFO Richard Keller and VP of Sales James Harrington on allegations of corporate espionage, and second, a broader evaluation of Meridian's current leadership and strategic direction." Richard immediately raised a hand. "Before we proceed, I'd like to register my objection to the characterization of my actions as corporate espionage. This is a deliberate misrepresentation designed to distract from substantive leadership concerns." Eleanor's expression remained neutral. "Your objection is noted, Richard. You'll have ample opportunity to present your perspective." She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Washington, please begin with a summary of the events leading to Friday's suspension." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus presented a methodical account of the server breach, the surveillance operation, and the documented transfer of proprietary information. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Security logs, audio recordings, video footage, and corroborating witness statements from Elizabeth and Alex. As Marcus concluded, the room fell silent. Board members exchanged troubled glances. Harold Wilson, Richard's strongest ally on the board, looked particularly disturbed. Richard was given the floor next. His defense was skillfully constructed, acknowledging the basic facts while reframing the intent behind them. Yes, information was shared with a competitor, he admitted, his tone regretful yet firm. But context matters. This action came after weeks of increasingly erratic leadership decisions that threatened Meridian's core business. James and I were attempting to protect the company's long-term interests from what we perceived as dangerous disruption. He turned to the board members, his expression earnest. Consider the pattern. Major resource reallocation without executive consultation, bypassing established decision-making protocols, alienating long-standing leaders, pursuing speculative opportunities outside our expertise. These aren't the actions of a measured, responsible CEO. They reflect impulsiveness, overconfidence, and, frankly, inexperience. The implication was clear without being explicit. Marcus was being characterized as the aggressive outsider, rushing to make his mark without understanding the company's culture or needs. Richard was positioning himself as the protective steward, driven to desperate measures only out of concern for Meridian's welfare. I acknowledge my methods were flawed, Richard continued, his voice softening with apparent contrition. I should have brought my concerns directly to the board rather than taking matters into my own hands. For that misjudgment, I apologize, but I stand by my assessment of the underlying problem. Meridian is being steered in a dangerous direction by leadership that prioritizes dramatic change over sustainable growth. It was a masterful performance, accepting technical guilt while claiming moral justification. Several board members seemed swayed by Richard's apparent sincerity. Eleanor turned to Marcus. Would you like to respond before we continue? Marcus rose slowly, deliberately taking his time. When he spoke, his voice was measured yet resonant with conviction. Mr. Keller's narrative is compelling, he began. It presents a stark choice between stability and disruption, between careful stewardship and reckless change. It's a false dichotomy, but an effective one. He moved to the center of the room, commanding attention without raising his voice. The reality is more complex. Meridian isn't choosing between stability and growth. It's choosing between stagnation and evolution, between a comfortable present and a sustainable future. Marcus activated the display screen, showing a series of metrics tracking Meridian's market position over the past 5 years. While quarterly profits have remained consistent, our market share has steadily declined. Our innovation index has dropped from industry-leading to middle tier. Employee retention in key technical roles has fallen by 23%. The data painted a sobering picture of a company maintaining the appearance of success while gradually losing its competitive edge. This isn't disruption for disruption's sake, Marcus continued. It's necessary adaptation to a changing market. The Nova initiative isn't a distraction from our core business. It's an extension of our existing strengths into new growth areas. As if on cue, his phone buzzed with a message. Marcus glanced at it briefly, then looked up with quiet confidence. I've just received word that Nova Health Systems has selected Meridian as their primary technology partner for their data integration project. The initial contract value is $42 million, with potential expansion to $100 million over 5 years. The announcement landed like a thunderclap in the quiet room. Board members straightened in their chairs, expressions shifting from concern to interest. Even Harold Wilson leaned forward, reassessing the situation in light of this development. This contract represents more than revenue, Marcus continued. It demonstrates our ability to compete in emerging markets without sacrificing our core competencies. The team that secured this opportunity did so by applying our existing strengths in new ways, exactly the approach I've advocated since joining Meridian. He then shifted to employee engagement metrics, showing dramatic improvements in technical team productivity, innovation submissions, and internal collaboration. These aren't just numbers. They represent human potential unleashed. Talent that was always present at Meridian, but constrained by hierarchical barriers and rigid thinking. Marcus turned to face Richard directly. The real issue here isn't about leadership style or pace of change. It's about whether Meridian exists to maintain comfortable power structures or to create exceptional value through innovation and inclusion. It's about whether we define success by who's in control or by what we achieve together. As Marcus concluded, the energy in the room had transformed. The narrative had shifted from a referendum on his leadership to a choice about Meridian's future identity. Eleanor guided the board through a series of questions, probing both Marcus's vision and Richard's concerns. As the discussion progressed, a clear pattern emerged. Board members increasingly directed their queries toward future opportunities rather than past conflicts. After nearly 2 hours of deliberation, Eleanor called for a board vote on 2 resolutions. First, the appropriate response to the documented ethical violations, and second, a vote of confidence in Marcus Washington's continued leadership as CEO. The results were decisive. The board voted unanimously to terminate Richard Keller and James Harrington for violations of company ethics policies and potential breaches of fiduciary duty. On the leadership confidence vote, only Harold Wilson abstained. The remaining board members expressed full support for Marcus's continued direction. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor addressed Marcus directly. "The board has spoken clearly. Meridian's future is in your hands, Mr. Washington. We look forward to seeing where you take us." The weeks that followed brought rapid evolution. With Richard and James gone, Marcus restructured the executive team, promoting Sophia Kim to head the newly expanded Innovation Division and elevating Elena Rivera to the Executive Committee. Victoria Blackwell took on additional strategic responsibilities, becoming a key architect of Meridian's evolving corporate culture. The Nova contract proved transformative, opening doors to healthcare markets previously considered inaccessible. The success emboldened other teams to propose new initiatives, creating a virtuous cycle of innovation and achievement. 6 months after the board showdown, Marcus stood at a podium addressing the entire company at their quarterly all-hands meeting. Meridian had just announced record growth figures, with stock prices reaching an all-time high. "Today's results didn't happen by accident," Marcus told the assembled employees. "They happened because we chose to believe in possibility rather than limitation. Because we recognize that the diversity of our perspectives strengthens our collective capabilities. Because we decided that merit and innovation matter more than hierarchy and tradition." He looked out over the crowd. Faces of all backgrounds, ages, and experiences unified in shared purpose. The challenge we faced wasn't unique to Meridian. Every organization must periodically decide whether to embrace evolution or cling to familiar patterns, even when those patterns no longer serve their purpose. After the meeting, Marcus returned to his office to find an envelope on his desk. Inside was a newspaper clipping featuring Richard Keller's announcement as the new CFO of a smaller traditional tech company. Paperclipped to it was a note in Victoria's handwriting. "Some patterns never change." Marcus smiled slightly as he set it aside. Richard would likely recreate the same environment he had maintained at Meridian. Comfortable, controlled, resistant to change. Some leaders never learned that true authority came not from position or power, but from the ability to unlock human potential. As he looked out over the Meridian campus, Marcus reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The resistance he'd faced hadn't been solely about his ideas or methods. Those had simply provided acceptable cover for more fundamental discomfort with his very presence in the CEO role. But that resistance had ultimately failed, not because Marcus had outmaneuvered it, but because excellence spoke louder than prejudice. Results transcended bias. Achievement rendered assumptions irrelevant. The transformation of Meridian wasn't complete. Cultural evolution was a continuous process, not a destination. But the foundation had been irrevocably shifted. The company now belonged to those who contributed regardless of title or background. Merit had replaced politics. Possibility had overcome limitation, and that, Marcus knew, was the most important victory of all.